Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Richard Ryan, and I am Senior Washington Correspondent for the Detroit News and President of the National Press Club. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience today, and those watching on C-SPAN or listening to this program on National Public Radio. The video archive of today's luncheon is provided by Connect Live and is available through the National Press Club website at press.org. National Press Club luncheons are also carried live by many sites on the World Wide Web. Press Club members may also access transcripts of our luncheons at our website. Non-members may purchase transcripts, audio, and videotapes by calling 1-888-343-1940. Before introducing our head table, I'd like to remind our members of some future speakers. On Wednesday, April 25th, Dale Petrosky, President of the Baseball Hall of Fame, will be our guest. On Friday, April 27th, Miss America, Angela Perez Baracchio, will be our guest here at the Press Club. And on Wednesday, May 2nd, Donna Brazil, former campaign manager for Al Gore, will be here to discuss election reform. How do we make it better next time? If you have any questions for our speaker today, please write them on the cards that are at your table and pass them up to me. But please make sure to write legibly so I can read the question, and I will ask as many as time permits. I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. But please hold your applause until all the head table guests are introduced. From your right and my left, John Donnelly of Defense Week and a member of the National Press Club Board of Governors. Christine Dorsey, reporter for the Donray Media Group. Mike Coleman, reporter for the Albuquerque Journal. Carrie Douglas, press secretary, the Swiss Embassy. Peter Spiegel, Washington correspondent for the Financial Times. Sally Ann Harper, chief mission support officer and chief financial officer for the GAO. Frank Ockerfer, the Press Club Speakers Committee chair and a former president of the National Press Club. And skipping over our speaker for a moment, Sean Bullard, Associate Legislative Director, National Association of Counties, and the member of the Speakers Committee who arranged today's luncheon. Thank you, Sean. Gene Dodaro, Chief Operating Officer, the GAO. Jeff Nelligan, Managing Director, Public Affairs, GAO. Laura Engdahl, 11 o'clock show writer. Thank you. Talk about your job security. While administrations and members of Congress may come and go, our guest today, Comptroller General David Walker, has 15 years to do his job. He was appointed to a 15-year term in 1998 by former President Bill Clinton, only the 7th Comptroller General in the nation's history. And he doesn't have to start looking for another job until 2013. That's long after President Bush and perhaps another president or two have departed the political scene. The 15-year term is the longest in government. It is 1 year longer than the term served by members of the Federal Reserve Board and 5 years longer than the director of the FBI. As Comptroller General, Mr. Walker is the nation's chief certified public accountant and the head of the General Accounting Office. The General Accounting Office, or GAO, was founded in 1921 to help gain control of government expenditures by auditing government agencies. The GAO is independent and nonpartisan and is often referred to as the investigative arm of Congress. It studies how the federal government spends taxpayers' dollars and advises governmental agencies on ways to make government more effective and responsive. It also evaluates federal programs, audits federal expenditures, issues legal opinions, and recommends actions. It issues more than 1,000 reports annually. Ultimately, the main task of the GAO is to ensure that government is accountable to the people. We deal with everything there is, any way in the world, is how Mr. Walker describes his agency's mission. And it accomplishes all of this with 3,275 employees and a budget of nearly $378 million. Prior to his appointment as Comptroller General, Mr. Walker was a partner of Arthur Andersen, a public trustee for Social Security and Medicare, and an assistant secretary of pension and welfare benefits for the Department of Labor. He is 49, married, and the father of 2 children. Although his position requires him to remain politically neutral, that doesn't mean he isn't from time to time dragged into the political arena. He is in the middle as Congress now bickers over how much of the expected budget surplus should go to tax cuts and how much to long-term debt reduction. Mr. Walker recently has taken on the task of warning the nation of the dangers it faces because of a deteriorating governmental workforce. The government President Bush inherited, Mr. Walker says, is riddled with weak management, lacks many of the skills needed to run federal programs, and cannot fully account for use of taxpayers' money. Federal agencies, he said, are poorly equipped to meet the challenges of the 21st century because their employees lack the necessary skills in information technology, science, economics, and management. The situation is so bad, Mr. Walker reported recently, that the Internal Revenue Service has failed to collect $100 billion in owed taxes. If anyone could tell us the honest truth, it is the head of an agency that does something few people are able to do in this city: deliver both good and bad news without the taint of politics. And he can't be fired for doing so. David Walker is the first Comptroller General to address the National Press Club, so please join me in welcoming him to our Newsmaker Luncheon today.
Thank you very much, Dick. It's a pleasure to be here, to be able to address all of you at the club, as well as those viewing via C-SPAN and those listening via National Public Radio. I'd like to acknowledge at the outset that I'm pleased that so many of you are here. Acknowledge Congressman Steve Horn, who's able to join us from California, and also Sarah McClendon, who is the Grand Dame of Washington Press Corps here, who's able to join us as well. I've been asked to address you today on a number of the challenges facing the United States and many other industrialized nations in the 21st century. My remarks today will be based upon GAO's work, by and large, and our work can be found on our website, www.gao.gov. Before I begin, I think it's important to add a few words as to what we do and what we don't do at GAO, because quite frankly, our name is somewhat confusing. Despite our full name, which is the U.S. General Accounting Office, we do not keep the books and records of the federal government. That is the primary responsibility of the chief financial officers of the various departments and agencies in government. We do, however, have the responsibility for auditing the financial statements of the consolidated U.S. government, and inspector generals or private sector firms, in part, will audit the various departments and agencies. We are in the legislative branch of government. We work for the Congress. The Congress is our primary client. The American people are our beneficial client. Our mission is to help maximize the performance and assure the accountability of the federal government for the benefit of the American people. I can assure you that's a full-time job. I can also assure you that that's a job that will be never-ending, and therefore neither I or any of my colleagues at GAO will ever have to worry about whether or not there will be a need for our agency. We are in the accountability business. Many people like accountability until they're the ones being held accountable. And I find that that exists not only in Washington, D.C., but also around the world. But that's our business. Yes, we do have the responsibility to fight fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement wherever it may exist in government. However, the inspector generals in each of the major departments and agencies are on the front line of fighting fraud, waste, and abuse within their respective departments and agencies. And our job tends to be to focus more on the more strategic issues, longer range issues, and cross-governmental issues, because we are more strategically positioned to be able to do that than they are. It's important that while we should have zero tolerance for fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement, it will never be zero. The U.S. government is the largest, the most complex, the most diverse, and arguably the most important entity on the face of the earth. The U.S. is the only superpower on earth. while we should have zero tolerance for fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement, it will never be zero. Fortunately, we have very little as compared to most other countries around the world, and we should be proud of that. And so therefore, while we will continue to fight that, we should also look for ways that we can improve the economy, the efficiency, and the effectiveness of government. And in fact, in many ways, the return on investment by focusing on these areas can be, in many times, multiple times greater than the traditional focus. We perform audits, investigations, evaluations, policy analyses, and provide legal services to the Congress. We cover everything the government does anywhere in the world. It's a big job, and it's a full-time job. And over 90% of our work is done at either the mandate of Congress or a request of Congress. So as a result, we are very client-focused. We're also very results-oriented, and we strive to lead by example. Being the leading accountability organization in the U.S. and arguably one of the leading in the world, we believe that we have a responsibility to be as good or better than anybody else that we evaluate, or else we would be a hypocrite. And none of us want to be called a hypocrite. But as far as results orientation, let me give you some examples. Just last year, fiscal 2000, we had $23 billion, that's B, billion dollars in financial benefits for the roughly $375 million that the Congress and the American taxpayers invested in us. That's a return on investment of $61 for every dollar invested, probably #1 in the world. But in addition to returning dollars, we helped to achieve a number of important non-financial accomplishments, like strengthening weapons systems acquisition practices, improving the quality of nursing home care, modernizing federal human capital practices, and enhancing computer security within the federal government. In doing our work, we must be dedicated to professional standards and core values, and to rise above partisan politics or ideological battles. Finally, as was mentioned, with a 15-year term, the Comptroller General of the United States is uniquely positioned to not just focus on today, but to think about tomorrow, and to sometimes take on the tough issues that need to be done, but there aren't enough people willing to do it. That's a good transition, I think, now into what is the environment that we face today and looking ahead. Quite frankly, it's a new ball game at the dawn of the 21st century. We have several important transitions underway. From a political perspective, we have a new Congress. The Republicans are in the majority, but there are narrower margins and shared power in the Senate. In addition, there are many new committee chairs and ranking members. From the standpoint of the executive branch, we have a new administration. The Bush administration has come to town, but only a fraction of their key players are in place at this point in time. From a fiscal perspective, we are transitioning from a period of actual past deficits year after year into a period of continued and projected surpluses for a number of years into the future. From an economic perspective, we are transitioning from the industrial age to the knowledge age. In the knowledge age, people will be the key factor in attaining and maintaining competitive advantage, whether you be in the private sector, the public sector, or not-for-profit sector. People will be the key. From a timing and psychological perspective, we have entered a new millennium. The beginning of the 21st century creates a natural tendency to reflect on the past and to contemplate the future. There are certain key trends that are undeniable and which have significant implications for the United States as well as many other industrialized nations around the world. These include the following. First, globalization. Globalization of markets, of information, and enterprises. There are no islands in a wired, interconnected, and yes, interdependent world. Changing demographics, aging societies, longer lifespans, decreasing worker-to-retiree ratios, slower workforce growth, greater diversity, and growing skills gaps. Third, changing security threats. The Cold War is over, and we won. We now face more diverse and more diffuse security threats that range from weapons of mass destruction of various types to illegal drugs, to infectious diseases, to cyber terrorism attacks. These threats are from rogue nations and groups and in a more open border environment. The next is rapidly evolving technologies. These new technologies provide opportunities to increase productivity and decrease cost, but they also pose an increased threat to national security and personal privacy. They can also lessen the emphasis on the critical human element. Quality of life considerations, from education to the environment to work-family issues to urban sprawl, quality of life is becoming an increasing interest for many people. Rising health care costs. The resurgence of health care costs due to a variety of factors will put increasing pressures on governments, employers, and individuals in the years ahead. We have a huge imbalance between what people want, which is unlimited, what they need, which should be defined and hopefully be met, and what we can collectively afford in the healthcare area. Stated differently, there is a huge imbalance between what has been promised and what resources are likely to be available in this area, especially in connection with Medicare. And last but not least, devolution. Devolving more activities closer to the people and from the government to the private and not-for-profit sectors leads to shared responsibility and more difficulties associated with accountability. These trends have significant implications for what government does and how government should do business in the 21st century. They impact a number of emerging challenges, and they also have direct effects on a number of long-standing issues. In that regard, let me touch on a few just to bring that to life as illustrative examples. With regard to emerging issues, the first one I'll touch on is long-range budget challenges. While CBO's most recent 10-year projections showed higher projected surpluses over the next 10 years, the fact is the long-term situation has gotten worse. And it's gotten worse primarily due to known demographic trends and rising health care costs. While budget projections are necessary, they're inherently uncertain, especially the farther out that you go. At the same point in time, demographic projections are much more certain. And why do I say that? Because a vast majority of the people that they relate to are alive and with us today. Our budget picture has changed dramatically since 1962. In 1962, over two-thirds of the federal budget was represented by discretionary spending. Now it's down to about a third, so it's flipped since 1962. In fiscal 2000, about a third was discretionary, and about 16% of the budget was dedicated to defense. In 1962, 50% of the federal budget was dedicated to defense. The reductions in defense spending over the last 38 years went to health care, Social Security, and interest on the federal debt. This was not a conscious trade-off. It's just a fact. It's what happened. The fact of the matter is that Social Security costs and Medicare and other health care costs are only going to go in one direction under our current system, and that is up. As a result, these pressures are likely to become more acute in the years ahead. And we don't know what interest on the federal debt will be in the future. While we know it's coming down due to recent efforts to pay down the debt, it's debatable as to how much debt will be paid down in the years ahead. And even if it is all paid off, the fact of the matter is our long-range budget simulations show that we're going to have significant challenges in the years ahead. For example, if Congress saves every penny of the Social Security surplus, but if the on-budget surplus is spent either through tax cuts and/or spending increases, then by the year 2030, discretionary spending will have to be cut in half, and it will have to be eliminated by 2040. There are alternatives, significantly increasing tax burdens over current levels in the longer term, or further mortgaging the future in the out years. But they aren't very attractive options. Guess what's in discretionary spending? National defense, the judicial system, education programs, some of which are specifically provided for in the Constitution of the United States. Given these long-range fiscal challenges, we must be prudent today about what is done with the current surplus, and we must get on with entitlement reform if we want to avoid a train wreck down the road. The human capital crisis. The key competitive element in the 21st century will be people. People are the source of all knowledge. And in a knowledge age, having the right people with the right skills will make the difference between success and failure. Yes, business processes and information technology is important, but people are essential. Unfortunately, government and all too many private sector employers have treated people as a cost to be cut rather than an asset to be valued. This must change. Due to largely numbers-driven and inadequately planned downsizing campaigns that have occurred in the last 10 to 15 years, the federal workforce is much smaller. However, it's also out of shape, has a range of skills imbalances, and is facing a huge succession planning challenge. As a result, we at GAO placed strategic human capital management, or I should say lack thereof, on our high-risk list within the last 2 months. The problem is not federal employees. It's the outdated policies, practices, and legislative framework that governs human capital practices in the federal government. We must take a range of steps within the context of current law to address these challenges and to attract and retain a quality workforce for the federal government. We must also move over time to build a consensus for comprehensive civil service reform whose time will come, but it has not yet arrived. We can't afford to have anything other than top quality people running the U.S. government. I already mentioned it's the largest, most complex, most diverse entity on the face of the earth. We can't afford to have second-class players running that type of enterprise, the only superpower on earth. The stakes are simply too high to do otherwise. Finally, given the key transitions and trends that I discussed, I think it's also important to note that both federal and private sector employment policies and practices will have to change in order to make better use, among other things, of probably the largest untapped resource in our country, and that is our senior citizens. Probably the largest untapped resource that we have. Third emerging challenge, the Postal Service. The U.S. Postal Service is the second largest employer in the United States as a separate freestanding entity, second only to General Motors, with $65 billion a year in annual revenues. It serves an important public purpose, but it is facing increasing competition and other pressures, both from a domestic and foreign perspective. The U.S. Postal Service lost $200 million last year and recently projected that they will lose $2 to $3 billion this year despite a recent rate increase. They've also projected that it's likely to get worse unless they get additional rate increases. The basic statutory framework which governs the Postal Service has not been changed since 1970, despite the fact that the world has changed significantly since then and will change even more in the years ahead. These and other factors have caused the Postal Service's transformation effort to be put on our high-risk list just within the last 2 weeks. The time has come to take a comprehensive look at the governance structure, management practices, labor policies, and statutory framework relating to the Postal Service. Simply raising postal rates is not the answer. We must deal with a range of structural and fundamental challenges that have built up over the years. This will be tough, but it is essential. The Postal Service challenge is too big to ignore. It also illustrates the need to relook at a range of federal policies, programs, and practices in light of the key trends that I discussed earlier. Now let me transition to continuing challenges and how these trends affect several continuing challenges. First, federal financial management. The federal government has been a lag indicator when it comes to federal financial management and accountability factors. It's only been in the last 10 years that the federal government has even had to come up with consolidated financial statements. And it's only been 4 years that the federal government has had to have audited consolidated financial statements. While progress is being made, much remains to be done. The simple fact of the matter is that no private sector enterprise could survive with the type financial management system the federal government has. While 18 of 24 major departments and agencies received so-called clean opinions on their financial statements this past year, only 6 received a clean opinion, had no material control weaknesses, and didn't have compliance problems. So 6 of 24 rather than 18 of 24. And in fact, of the 18 of 24 that did get a so-called clean opinion, a majority of those only got the clean opinion through engaging in so-called heroic efforts, where they dedicated vast amounts of financial and human resources to basically recreate the books as of one day 6 months prior, that is, the end of the fiscal year end. This is no way to run an enterprise, whether it be in the public sector or the private sector. It must change. Government leaders have a responsibility, and the taxpayers have a right to assure that the federal government has appropriate systems and controls in place to safeguard taxpayer dollars and to assure government accountability. Other countries much smaller than the U.S. have done this already. It's time that we do. In addition, federal reporting standards must place additional emphasis on performance information, long-range commitments and contingencies, and the government's most valuable asset, namely its employees. Federal acquisition and sourcing strategies. While the federal workforce is smaller, the so-called shadow workforce has grown dramatically in the last 10 years. The shadow workforce is primarily comprised of contractor personnel performing services for the federal government. In addition, more and more functions are being devolved to lower levels of government and to non-governmental sources. This raises a number of policy, equity, and accountability issues. We need to fundamentally review and reassess a range of federal policies, procedures, and practices in this area. In doing so, we must balance a number of competing interests among a variety of stakeholders, such as taxpayers, contractors, the government, and federal workers. I'm hopeful that the recently announced Commercial Activities Panel that I will chair will be able to make some meaningful progress in this area and also lay the groundwork for more comprehensive action in the human capital area in the years ahead. Last but not least, on the example of continuing challenges, Defense Department business process transformation. We have the best military forces on earth. We have proved that we are #1 on the battlefield several times over the past 10 years. Yes, the Department of Defense and the military forces that it represents rate an A on effectiveness as it relates to fighting and winning armed conflicts. However, the Department of Defense is a D+ at best on economy, efficiency, and accountability. DOD has 6 of 21 high-risk areas on our list, and they also have the 2 government-wide high-risk challenges as well. DOD's poor financial management and reporting practices represents the primary roadblock in the federal government obtaining a clean opinion on its financial statements. DOD's economy, efficiency, and related accountability problems result in billions of wasted dollars, dollars that could be better spent on readiness, the quality of life for our uniformed personnel, and closing the gap between wants and available funding in connection with a variety of major weapon systems. DOD must change the way that it does business, and this will be tough given the culture at DOD and in many other organizations. But basically what we're talking about is that government has to change how it does business if it's to be effective and maximize the return on taxpayer dollars while achieving its missions. In closing, the 21st century is a new ballgame. Much has changed in the last 20 years, and the world is likely to change even more in the next 20. Now is the time for us to ask 2 key questions as we look forward, especially in light of our long-range fiscal challenges. First, What is the proper role of government in the 21st century? Secondly, how should the government do business in the 21st century? The first question raises a range of public policy issues that must be answered by elected officials. It involves relooking at a range of government programs, policies, and tools in light of past and expected changes and future challenges. In addressing this question, or the series of questions, GAO will be there to help by getting facts, analyzing the situation, laying out options, talking about the pros and cons, so that elected officials and other policymakers can make timely and informed judgments. The second question, how should government do business, is much more operationally oriented. GAO will continue to aggressively pursue this area to not only identify problems, but also to recognize progress. We will continue to provide tools and methodologies to help others help themselves see the way forward, how to maximize their performance, how to assure their accountability in a range of areas. In doing so, we'll continue to be committed to our professional standards and our core values of accountability, integrity, and reliability. The press can play an important role as well in helping to engender the public debate, to identify not only the problems, but also to be able to acknowledge progress, while recognizing that government does do some things right. Let's work together to make government work better for all Americans. I appreciate your time and attention and would be more than happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, and we do have a few questions here. Start off with this one. Questioner asks or mentions that there are several intelligence agencies whose budgets are not publicized. So how does the American taxpayer and even Congress in some instances know that these dollars are being properly and wisely spent?
There are two entities, or two types of entities within the federal government in which we do not do as much work. The first is the Federal Reserve, which you know is an independent entity dealing with monetary and fiscal policy. The second represents the intelligence agencies. We do work from time to time, but statutorily our role is more limited with regard to the intelligence agencies. However, the CIA, for example, does have an inspector general, and other agencies have inspector generals who are on the front line of fighting fraud, waste, abuse, trying to maximize economy and efficiency, and who also have the responsibility either to perform or oversee the conduct of the financial statement audit for those agencies.
Some federal agencies, like the Internal Revenue Service, do not have the money to hire needed personnel and to do their job properly. Does the GAO have the staff to effectively accomplish its mission?
We have the right stuff. It's debatable about whether or not we have the right amount of staff. The GAO is 40% smaller today than it was in 1992. Part of that was clearly justified, but I would say that we will take our case to the Congress about whether or not we think we need additional resources. My personal view is when you're talking about the budget, it's important that people recognize that you should not assume that the baseline is okay. All too frequently in Washington, people are arguing over incremental amounts. Should it go up a little bit? Should it go down a little bit? And there's not enough focus on what is in the baseline. There's also not enough focus on what are you getting for the amount of dollars that are being invested. I think that we have a very strong case, and I hope that the Congress will agree that some targeted investments might make sense going forward.
The Clinton administration put a lot of emphasis on their Reinventing Government program, and certainly Vice President Al Gore claimed a lot of credit for that. But was that credit well-deserved, or did that program go too far in eliminating federal employees?
Well, first, if you talk of the National Performance Review, my personal opinion is that they clearly did do some things that helped make a difference. Not as much as they claim, but they clearly did do some things to help make a difference. One of the real concerns that I had about what happened in the last 10 years is there was an effort to downsize the federal workforce. to get to certain numbers, arbitrary numbers, over a fairly arbitrary period of time. And with a lack of strategic planning, and based upon the current statutory framework for how you have to go about achieving reductions in force, it served to hurt us in two ways. One, the last people in were the first people let go, which obviously undercuts your ability to hire new people no matter what level they're coming from. And secondly, the people who were left, on the average, were older, and a higher percentage were eligible to retire. And so therefore you hurt yourselves on the entry, and you ended up increasing your risk with regard to the balance of your workforce. My personal view is that we need to do a lot more in the context of current law in the human capital area. We need to have strategic planning linking to the overall strategic plan. We need to end up doing a lot to get back in shape, to be able to deal with the skills imbalances and the huge succession planning challenges that we have. And I'm hoping that the current administration won't be driven by numbers, and I'm cautiously optimistic that they won't be.
This questioner mentions that, that you're talking about federal service, civil service reform. He wants to know more about that, and particularly wants to know how can public service be made more attractive so that the country and the federal government does indeed get the best and brightest of its people.
Well, first on civil service reform, I personally believe that 80% plus of what needs to be done in the human capital area at the federal government level can be done within the context of current law. And I think we've got to get on with doing that. Civil service reform is not only something that has to be done, but there has to be a political consensus that is pulled together in order to achieve that. I believe that ultimately that can be done, but I believe that it's going to take time to do it. I believe that we need to get people to do everything they can in the context of current law. We need to study various departments and agencies of what they're doing in the context of current law to the extent that they've been given additional authorities like the GAO, like IRS, like FAA, like the Department of Defense. To what extent have they used those additional authorities, and to what effect? And to what extent might it be possibly broadened to apply to more government agencies? I think that's probably 2+ years away. How can we get more people in government? First, I think we have to understand that people that come into government aren't motivated to maximize their self-worth, or pardon me, their net worth. They're motivated to maximize their self-worth. They're focused on we more than me. They do the work because they believe they can make a difference, because they're trying to help improve things for the greater good, to look out for the collective best interest of all rather than the narrow interest of a few. They can make good money. They can have better job security. They can have a better work-family balance. And they can have an extremely challenging job that can make a difference. But I think we also have to make sure that we don't try to paint, the government or public servants with a broad brush. All too frequently you hear negative things. You don't hear positive things enough. I'm cautiously optimistic that what I'm hearing about the generation, I guess it's Y, is that they tend to be more team-oriented, and they tend to be more focused on the collective interest of all rather than just self. And I hope that that will help us to maybe be able to go back to the days of Kennedy where he was asking the right questions.
You mentioned a couple times in your speech about a high-risk list. Could you tell us a little bit more about that for those who don't know? And then this questioner would like to know what happens when a federal agency such as the Postal Service is put on this high-risk list.
The high-risk list is something that was created by my predecessor, Chuck Balger, in 1990. And it represents a list of programs or functions in the government that are higher risk of fraud, waste, abuse, or mismanagement, or who are at risk of not being able to achieve their mission. We have had 11 functions or programs come off the list since 1990. Unfortunately, we've had more come on that have gone off. For point of clarification, the Postal Service is not on the high-risk list. Their transformation effort is on the high-risk list. Clearly, you could short-term deal with the Postal Service's problem by raising postal rates, but that doesn't deal with the underlying problem. And so we need to fundamentally look at the regulatory structure, the governance structure, and a range of issues to deal with it. Typically, when something is put on our high-risk list, that generates light or visibility. With light comes heat, and with heat comes action, and that's what we want.
Defense contractors, this questioner notes, repaid the Pentagon almost $1 billion in overpayments last year, and that was the only amount that was discovered. Is there a lot that's not being overpaid, a lot that's not being discovered, and what can be done about this?
Well, one of the things that we've recommended, and a number of members of Congress are agreeing, is that we need to identify so-called improper payments, double payments, payments that are made in error, etc. We have worked with the Healthcare Financing Administration, HCFA, who manages the Medicare program, to be able to do that. And by doing that, they have been able to reduce their improper payments from about $23 billion a year down to about $12 billion a year. It's still too high, but it's coming in the right direction. It's like most things in life. You can't manage something unless you measure it. We are working to try to get the same thing done at the Department of Defense, but part of the problem that exists is some of our laws create an unlevel playing field. For example, under current law, if the federal government must pay contractors within a certain number of days. If it does not pay those contractors within a certain number of days, it has to pay interest and in some cases a penalty for delayed payment. However, if it inadvertently overpays the contractor does not have to tell the government. And in fact, if the contractor is able to hold on to the money for a length of time, it doesn't have to pay interest or penalty. That's an unlevel playing field and something that I think has to be looked at.
A couple of questions dealing with the GAO's relationship with Congress. It says here that the GAO is sometimes accused of adopting the bias of the member of Congress who requests a particular report. And the second question notes that 90% of your work is done at the request of Congress, and if Congress is largely a political body, how can you maintain you are not political?
Okay. Our clients are politicians, but we are professional public servants. We're CPAs, we're lawyers, we're actuaries, we're PhDs in a variety of different fields. We have bomber pilots, you name it. We've got about every type of skill you can imagine. Probably the broadest range of skills of any organization on earth, arguably, is within GAO's organizational structure. The way we try to go about discharging our job is by being committed to professional standards and core values. Yes, our clients are all politicians. They all represent different geographical districts. They all are a member of a certain party. They have different ideologies. And in many cases, they may think they have the answer to the question they're asking us to research before we've done the work. But what's important is that we need to do our work. We need to get the facts. We need to do our independent, objective analysis. And we need to tell it like it is. The key word in our core value is integrity, which means professional, objective, fact-based, nonpartisan, non-ideological, fair, and balanced. And we have a number of procedures to make sure that that's exactly what our work is. And if it's not that, then quite frankly, the value of our organization will decline dramatically.
Did I just hear you say that the GAO has bomber pilots on its staff? Tell me about that.
We have a number of veterans that served in different capacities, and we've actually got some ex-bomber pilots as well. But they're not, you don't have to worry, don't get nervous, they're not on call.
They're not actively involved at the moment, I take it.
But always ready.
Always ready, that's good. This questioner asks, isn't it nearly impossible to trim the fat from the funds allocated to federal agencies when cabinet secretaries and administrators usually have that so-called special relationship to members of Congress? How are you going to work that out if these administrators and the Congress people are so close?
I actually don't think that that's the real challenge. I think the real challenge is that you need to focus on who is focusing on how is government being run. Realistically, while you have to have the support of the cabinet secretary, most cabinet secretaries are only going to be in their job for 2 to 3 years. Most cabinet secretaries are focused more on policy issues, not operational issues, for understandable reasons. So I think one of the things that we actually need to do is we need to spend a lot more time and attention on focusing how government does business. What type of strategic planning, what type of financial management, human capital strategy, information technology, who do we have doing this, to what extent are these people qualified, to what extent are they Are they there for an extended period of time and have job security in order to be able to take on some of these tough issues that have taken years to get where they are and will take years to resolve? Yes, people have relationships, but I really don't think that's the problem.
Does the GAO play into the hands of political bureaucrat bashers when it reports of this mismanagement of some government agencies, especially when Congress fails to appropriate enough money to permit those agencies to hire enough staff to do the job?
We are very committed to what I would call constructive engagement. By that I mean is, yes, we work for the Congress, and yes, our job is to identify if things aren't working right, to point that out, and to make recommendations to correct it. At the same point in time, basically we want to try to make government work better for all Americans, and to us, success is being able to do that. And in being able to do that, that means not only pointing out what's wrong, but when somebody does something right, to acknowledge that. When they're making progress, to give them credit for that. To try to work with them in a constructive fashion to focus on the most important areas. One example is Commissioner Rosati. He and I sit down probably 3 times a year. We talk about all the various challenges they have, what our observations are, try to help them put together their priorities so they can make continuing and meaningful differences as they move along. And I think that the tools and methodologies we've published have gone a long way to help others help themselves. And so I feel that we are being fair and balanced, although that's obviously in the eye of the beholder.
As is most things. How many of the government employees who retire in the next 5 years, how many of them will be replaced by other government employees? Will there be replaced?
I don't have the exact number, but the answer is too many. Basically, about, as I recall, I think over 50% of the executives in the federal government are eligible to retire within 4 years, and over 1/3 of the entire workforce. Now the question is, how many will retire? Just because you're eligible to retire doesn't mean you're going to do it immediately, although ultimately you will. What I found is there's a new category of worker in determining when somebody is going to retire. It's called dual income college expenses. We have more and more dual income families. And you not only need to know when the federal employee is eligible to retire, but when is their spouse eligible to retire. That can help you determine. Plus, if you have kids in college, or if they hadn't gone through yet, you know you're going to be working until they go through in all likelihood. So we try to go on a case-by-case basis and find out. But we've got a huge percentage that will be leaving within the next 5 years.
Would you please assess the technology capabilities of the federal government? This question notes that even Congress seems to be deficient in this area and very slow to adopt to new information and new technologies.
We've got a long way to go in technology in the federal government. We do have a success story. The success story is Y2K. That was an example of where the federal government mobilized, executive branch, legislative branch, dealt with it strategically, had a deadline that couldn't be moved. You couldn't legislate the change in the date, and as a result, due to concerted action on behalf of a variety of parties, I might also add GAO employees, that was a success. There were no major disruptions, and there were a number of improvements that were made in the underlying systems. The problem is we've got too many of them. We've got too many freestanding, independent systems that don't have a common architecture, that don't communicate with each other, where everybody's basically trying to do their own thing. We have to step back, move more towards government-wide enterprise architectures, take control of the projects, take control of the resources in order to be able to make meaningful progress in this regard. Other countries have done that, including Brazil. We need to learn from what others have done.
You mentioned in your speech that senior citizens are the nation's largest untapped resource. Well, this questioner said that, that he or she has heard that seldom are employees in the federal government over 40 or 45 promoted, and that the number of men, competent men over the age of 55 have been laid off or riffed in political or governmental jargon. The question, do agency personnel officers know that their skilled older workers are needed now and can be promoted now?
Well, if they don't, they better get with the program. I mean, the fact of the matter is, in a knowledge-based economy where you're using your brain rather than your brawn, age really has little significance. And from a practical standpoint, you need to be able to identify the skills and knowledge that each worker has, how that relates to mission, and you need to be able to do everything you can to attract and retain skilled and knowledgeable workers who are performing at a reasonable level for as long as you can.
This question notes that there have been some representations made that official predictions about future demographics, for example, the aging of our society, are far too optimistic, and that in fact the financial drains for all the programs that you mentioned will be even greater than official projections. Do you agree, and has the GAO looked into this, or will it do so?
Well, obviously long-range projections are difficult, and the assumptions that underlie them are subject to debate. I was a trustee of Social Security and Medicare for 5 years, from 1990 to 1995. We had to project for 75 years a variety of economic, demographic, and other factors. When you get right down to it, only God knows what's going to happen that far out, and God's not telling us. And so we did the best that we could. The fact is that most recently there has been an increase on behalf of the trustees as to what they think the long-range cost of annual health care cost increases are going to be. That change alone in the last trustee's estimate ended up about doubling the Medicare deficit in 2025. Huge numbers. And the present value of that deficit over the next 75 years for the HI Part A program alone went up from about $2.6 trillion, I think, to about $4.6 trillion in the last year alone. There are some that think that because of technological advances, people are going to live longer, and therefore the numbers could even be worse. On the other hand, we don't really know. One thing we do know for sure is that in a knowledge-based economy, people have an ability to contribute longer. And yet many government policies and many employment practices in both the public and the private sector have not facilitated that, have not encouraged people to continue to contribute, and in fact, in some cases, have encouraged them to leave. We need to rethink that.
I would agree with that. After all the commotion over the presidential race that took place, there have been many calls for electoral reform, but Congress doesn't seem interested, and they certainly have been dragging their feet about that. Is the GAO involved in that aspect at all?
Actually, Congress is really interested, and they're actually doing something that I think is very prudent. They're trying to get the facts, and they're trying to understand the options and the pros and cons before they act. We are actually doing a significant amount of work for the Congress on a bipartisan basis to look at a variety of issues with regard to elections, military and overseas ballots, technology, absentee balloting procedures, recount procedures. We are going to be issuing a variety of reports over the next several months, and I expect that these reports will end up serving as a solid foundation for Congress to be able to make informed judgments in this area.
Tell us, when your investigators and auditors go into an agency or some governmental outpost, do they ever meet resistance or stonewalling from the individuals there? What do you do about it when you do?
Well, sometimes they don't believe when we say we're here from the GAO and we're here to help you. But the fact of the matter is actions speak louder than words. We try to have a constructive, cooperative, ongoing relationship with departments and agencies. For example, I've already met with about half of the cabinet officials already in the new Bush administration. I expect that I'll meet with the balance of them, probably by the end of the summer. We have linkages, obviously, that go on at different levels of the organization to try to help them understand who we are, what we do, how we try to go about it under this constructive engagement approach. But if they aren't cooperative, we have certain authorities and powers that we can bring to bear. We have the ability to issue demand letters for access to certain information, and we have the ability to take the executive branch to court if we have to. I have issued several demand letters since being Comptroller General. People need to know that when we're serious, that we're prepared to act and take advantage of our statutory authorities. Fortunately, we've been able to work all of them out, and we haven't had to take anybody to court. And I hope that continues to be the case.
Very good. Before asking the last question, I would like to do a couple of things here. First of all, I'd like to present you with a certificate of appreciation for your appearance here today at the National Press Club.
Thank you very much.
And secondly, I'd like to present you with the famous National Press Club coffee mug, which can be used for a variety of things. And actually, the last question is sort of a two-part question. One, how does it feel to have a 15-year job without fear of being fired, or in governmental parlance, a rift? And secondly, who watches the watchdog?
I have a very unique job. I'm pleased and proud to head GAO, which is comprised of outstanding, dedicated public servants with skills in a variety of areas. But with my 15-year term, it enables me to be able to look longer range, more comprehensively, and to take on tough issues that need to be addressed, but frankly, realistically, aren't going to be addressed unless you end up having a long-term and job security. I'm trying to take advantage of that fact. As far as who watches the watchdog, we do have an external audit by a private sector firm. We do have an outside audit committee. We do have a peer review periodically of the work that we do. We do publish all of our work, which is very transparent, and therefore the press and others can question us. We also have the Governmental Affairs Committee as our oversight committee in the Senate, and the Government Reform Committee as our oversight committee in the House. And I can assure you they aren't shy, and they let us know if they have concerns about things. And so there actually are people watching the watchdogs as well. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Mr. David Walker for his thoughtful comments today, and I'd also like to thank all of you for coming here. And I'd like to thank National Press Club staff members Melinda Cook, Pat Nelson, Joanne Booz, Melanie Abdow-Dermott, and Howard Rothman for organizing today's luncheon. And also thanks to the NPC Library for the research. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Auditing the financial statements of the consolidated U.S. government, and inspector generals or private sector firms in part will audit the various departments and agencies. We are in the legislative branch of government. We work for the Congress. The Congress is our primary client. The American people are our beneficial client. Our mission is to help maximize the performance and assure the accountability of the federal government for the benefit of the American people. I can assure you that's a full-time job. I can also assure you that that's a job that will be never-ending, and therefore neither I or any of my colleagues at GAO will ever have to worry about whether or not there will be a need for our agency. We are in the accountability business. Many people like accountability until they're the ones being held accountable. And I find that that exists not only in Washington, D.C., but also around the world. But that's our business. Yes, we do have the responsibility to fight fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement wherever it may exist in government. However, the inspector generals in each of the major departments and agencies are on the front line of fighting fraud, waste, and abuse within their respective departments and agencies. And our job tends to be to focus more on the more strategic issues, longer range issues, and cross-governmental issues because we are more strategically positioned to be able to do that than they are. It's important that while we should have zero tolerance for fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement, it will never be zero. The U.S. government is the largest, the most complex, the most diverse, and arguably the most important entity on the face of the earth. The U.S. is the only superpower on earth. While we should have zero tolerance for fraud, waste, abuse, and mismanagement, it will never be zero. Fortunately, we have very little as compared to most.
Is often referred to as the investigative arm of Congress. It studies how the federal government spends taxpayers' dollars and advises governmental agencies on ways to make government more effective and responsive. It also evaluates federal programs, audits federal expenditures, issues legal opinions, and recommends actions. It issues more than 1,000 reports annually. Ultimately, the main task of the GAO is to ensure that government is accountable to the people. We deal with everything there is, any way in the world, is how Mr. Walker describes his agency's mission. And it accomplishes all of this with 3,275 employees and a budget of nearly $378 million. Prior to his appointment as Comptroller General, Mr. Walker was a partner of Arthur Andersen, a public trustee for Social Security and Medicare, and an Assistant Secretary of Pension and Welfare Benefits for the Department of Labor. He is 49, married, and the father of 2 children. Although his position requires him to remain politically neutral, that doesn't mean he isn't from time to time dragged into the political arena. He is in the middle as Congress now bickers over how much of the expected budget surplus should go to tax cuts and how much to long-term debt reduction. Mr. Walker recently has taken on the task of warning the nation of the dangers it faces because of a deteriorating governmental workforce. The government President Bush inherited, Mr. Walker says, is riddled with weak management, lacks many of the skills needed to run federal programs, and cannot fully account for use of taxpayers' money. Federal agencies, he said, are poorly equipped to meet the challenges of the 21st century because their employees lack the necessary skills in information technology, science, economics, and management. The situation is so bad, Mr. Walker reported recently, that the Internal Revenue Service Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Richard Ryan, and I am Senior Washington Correspondent for the Detroit News and President of the National Press Club. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests in the audience today, and those watching on C-SPAN or listening to this program on National Public Radio. The video archive of today's luncheon is provided by Connect Live and is available through the National Press Club website at press.org. National Press Club luncheons are also carried live by many sites on the World Wide Web. Press Club members may also access transcripts of our luncheons at our website. Non-members may purchase transcripts, audio, and videotapes by calling 1-888-343-1940. Before introducing our head table, I'd like to remind our members of some future speakers. On Wednesday, April 25th, Dale Petrosky, President of the Baseball Hall of Fame, will be our guest. On Friday, April 27th, Miss America, Angela Perez Baracchio, will be our guest here at the Press Club. And on Wednesday, May 2nd, Donna Brazil, former campaign manager for Al Gore, will be here to discuss election reform. How do we make it better next time? If you have any questions for our speaker today, please write them on the cards that are at your table and pass them up to me. But please make sure to write legibly so I can read the question, and I will ask as many as time permits. I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. But please hold your applause until all the head table guests are introduced. From your right and my left, John Donnelly of Defense Week and a member of the National Press Club Board of Governors. Christine Dorsey, reporter for the Donray Media Group. Mike Cole has failed to collect $100 billion in owed taxes. If anyone can tell us the honest truth, it is the head of an agency that does something few people are able to do in this city: deliver both good and bad news without the taint of politics. And he can't be fired for doing so. David Walker is the first Comptroller General to address the National Press Club, so please join me in welcoming him to our Newsmaker Luncheon today.
Thank you very much, Dick. It's a pleasure to be here, to be able to address all of you at the club, as well as those viewing via C-SPAN and those listening via National Public Radio. I'd like to acknowledge at the outset that I'm pleased that so many of you are here. Acknowledge Congressman Steve Horn, who's able to join us from California, and also Sarah McClendon, who is the Grand Dame of Washington Press Corps here, who's able to join us as well. I've been asked to address you today on a number of the challenges facing the United States and many other industrialized nations in the 21st century. My remarks today will be based upon GAO's work, by and large, and our work can be found on our website, www.gao.gov. Before I begin, I think it's important to add a few words as to what we do and what we don't do at GAO, because quite frankly, our name is somewhat confusing. Despite our full name, which is the U.S. General Accounting Office, we do not keep the books and records of the federal government. That is the primary responsibility of the chief financial officers of the various departments and agencies in government. We do, however, have the responsibility for audit.
Coleman, reporter for the Albuquerque Journal. Carrie Douglas, press secretary, the Swiss Embassy. Peter Spiegel, Washington correspondent for the Financial Times. Sally Ann Harper, chief mission support officer and chief financial officer for the GAO. Frank Ockerfer, the Press Club Speakers Committee chair and a former president of the National Press Club. And skipping over our speaker for a moment, Sean Bullard, Associate Legislative Director, National Association of Counties, and the member of the Speakers Committee who arranged today's luncheon. Thank you, Sean. Gene Dodaro, Chief Operating Officer, the GAO. Jeff Nelligan, Managing Director, Public Affairs, GAO. Laura Engdahl, 11 o'clock show writer. Thank you. Talk about your job security. While administrations and members of Congress may come and go, our guest today, Comptroller General David Walker, has 15 years to do his job. He was appointed to a 15-year term in 1998 by former President Bill Clinton, only the 7th Comptroller General in the nation's history, and he doesn't have to start looking for another job until 2013. That's long after President Bush and perhaps another president or two have departed the political scene. The 15-year term is the longest in government. It is 1 year longer than the term served by members of the Federal Reserve Board and 5 years longer than the director of the FBI. As Comptroller General, Mr. Walker is the nation's chief certified public accountant and the head of the General Accounting Office. The General Accounting Office, or GAO, was founded in 1921 to help gain control of government expenditures by auditing government agencies. The GAO is independent and nonpartisan